Good afternoon or good morning for some of you, and welcome to today's Mind Matters webinar. My name is Chanel Moore. I'm the Peer Support Coordinator here at Lung Foundation Australia. We'd like to start today's webinar by first acknowledging the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and pay our respects to them and their cultures and to all elders past, present and emerging. So thank you again for logging on. We're all joining in from various parts of the country and experiencing various COVID-19 restrictions and lockdowns. So we just wanted to say thank you so much for carving out the next 45 minutes or so to take that time to explore self-compassion and mindfulness with our speaker today. Now, we will be recording this webinar, so if at any stage you do need to leave, you will be able to access the presentation and the information via our website or YouTube channel, and we will notify everyone when that recording is available. Now, before I do introduce our wonderful speaker, I will also just remind people that they are able to pop questions or thoughts that they have into that Q&A box, and feel free to use that throughout the webinar. You don't need to wait until the very end. We're very fortunate that our speaker today will go through a mini guided practice with us to give you some insight into how you can incorporate self-compassion and mindfulness into your day-to-day life. And look, we're very excited to now announce we have launched our Mind Matters Mental Health Hub, which is available via our website. So I will pop that link into the chat box as well, so you are able to access that. And you'll also be able to see our speaker in some of those video resources that are available on there. So as I said, we have a fantastic speaker, Tracy Story. You may have seen Tracy in an earlier webinar last year on carer wellbeing. Tracy is an experienced social worker, having previously worked with people, partners and families in the field of post-acute care and chronic health conditions. She has been a practicing counsellor and therapist in a range of health, fitness and educational agencies, and has practiced yoga and meditation for over 3 decades. As well as finding joy in sharing these practices with clients and colleagues, Tracy also finds them invaluable for her own well-being. So thank you, Tracy, for again taking the time to join us all today. I'll now hand over to you and invite you to share your presentation and chat with everyone today.
Thanks very much, Chanel. Thanks for that intro. I'm so honoured and excited to be part of this project with the Lung Foundation. Mindfulness and self-compassion, these practices, among many others, have kept me relatively sane through the past 4 decades of my life. And I've also had the privilege of sharing them with, I was thinking about it before, probably thousands of people now, with pretty much 100% benefit rate. So I'm just extremely passionate about these practices. So it's a real honour to be able to be here and share them with you today. And as I've been preparing for this webinar, it's really come home to me. It's been really reinforced that resources to support our mental health and well-being are probably extra important at the moment. With everything that's going on, the rapid changes and uncertainty that we're all facing, we really need to look after ourselves, our loved ones, and the broader community as much as we possibly can. It's been my experience that, generally speaking, we human beings don't do so well with uncertainty. It really triggers our primitive response systems, often known as the fight, flight, and freeze response of our central nervous system. And the mindfulness and self-compassion practices, on the other hand, trigger the opposite response in the central nervous system. So it really helps to balance, provide a counterbalance and soothe and repair our nervous system. So I think these topics are extra important at the moment. So this webinar in part is an introduction to the 5 videos that we've created for you, which are a series of practices that can help you to train your mind in a very specific way. And I want to emphasize that I've created this series specifically for people with respiratory and lung conditions. So I've been very particular with the language that I use in these practices. And I've had really encouraging feedback from people who've used the practices with me with respiratory conditions. And they've often been people who've been the most skeptical about getting any benefit, and their feedback has been really positive. So I'm really hoping that the same will be true for you guys. So I'm just going to bring up the outline for today. I'll talk a little bit about mindfulness and self-compassion and why they can be helpful for pretty much anyone. We'll do a short practice of the first video in the series, and then we'll have a Q&A session, as Chanel has already mentioned. So we all know that the mind and body interact, and that as human beings, our mental health is just as important as our physical health. And it's been my experience, both personally and professionally, that chronic health conditions, and particularly those related to the lungs and to breathing, create high states of tension, often resulting in contraction or tightening of our bodies, our minds, and sometimes even our hearts and personalities. And perhaps even more important, a change to our health can create a significant change to how we feel about ourselves, the world, our place in it, and also it can affect the way that people respond or relate to us. And these are really difficult human experiences that we all have to manage at some point or another, whether it's for ourselves, for a loved one, or someone, in our community. And it's where mindfulness and compassion really start to come into their own. So let's have a little look at what is mindfulness. I love this picture. Mindful or mindful. I think it just speaks. I mean, really, you could just put that picture up and really not say anything else. We all need to get dog minds, I think, or be a little bit more relaxed. So most people will have heard of mindfulness by now, and some of you may already have an established practice. And if that's true for you, then great. But for those who don't, I really hope that today sparks your interest to try out our videos and maybe even look a little bit deeper into these practices. As this slide shows, mindfulness is actually a state of mind. So there's 2 different things we're talking about. We're talking about mindfulness practices, which are often a form of meditation, but not always, and then the state of mindfulness. So this is one of the most often used definitions from one of the pioneers in the field, Jon Kabat-Zinn, and he defines it as mindfulness as the ability to pay attention on purpose in the present moment and non-judgmentally. So there's quite a lot to unpack there, and the practice will actually show you a little bit more. I like to break it down to these 3 words. These are what I call my take-home message. So if you remember these 3 words, you're going to remember the essence of mindfulness and will be able to apply it. So they are intention, attention, and attitude. So essentially what we're doing when we're practicing a mindfulness technique to create a state of mindfulness, we're intentionally placing our attention into the present moment with a very specific quality of attention or attitude, and that's usually described as an open attitude, a kind attitude, an expansive attitude, or a compassionate attitude. So intention, attention, and attitude are the key qualities of a mindful state of being. So let's try just a little experiment I wish I could see you guys. It's kind of weird talking to, to this screen. But anyway, let's try a little experiment. Just notice where your mind or your attention is right now. So it might sound a little weird, but just notice where your mind or attention is right now. Is it here, paying attention to this webinar? Or is it in the future somewhere, planning, maybe thinking about what you're going to do after the webinar, or this afternoon, or next week? Or maybe your mind is in the past, reflecting on something this morning or yesterday or 2 weeks or 2 years ago. It's not right or wrong, good or bad. This is just a little experiment to notice that often our minds are not here in the present moment. And as I said, it's not good or bad. It's minds wander. It's what they do. Minds also have what we call a negativity bias. So they tend to go to what's difficult or what's problematic in our environment or in our bodies or relationships. And the reason is trying to keep us safe. So that's very helpful, but we also need a break from that. And that's where training the mind to come into the present moment onto an object of attention or an anchor, and we'll practice this a little later, can just give your mind and your body together that little bit of time out from protecting us and keeping us safe and looking for threats. Because the other thing that we know too is that most of us humans seem to spend a lot of our time on what we call autopilot. That, we're habitually repeating the same patterns of thoughts, feelings and behaviors over and over. And again, it's not a problem with that. Sometimes you don't want to, you want to just be on autopilot, but there's a lot we miss out on if we're on autopilot, if we're not actually here in the present moment. And mindfulness helps us to come into the present moment, to step back from and observe what's happening, our thoughts, our feelings, our impulses. Being able to observe them rather than being caught up in them creates a space. And in that space, we can get more choice, more flexibility in our responses. So one of my clients actually said that the mindfulness practice helped her to live on purpose instead of on impulse. And that has stuck with me. That client I saw, about 20 years ago, and it has stuck with me because it was just such a great way of describing what mindfulness practice can do. So let's have a little look now at self-compassion. A good place to start when we're looking at self-compassion is because, before I move on, the interesting thing is that most of us find it much easier to be compassionate to other people than we do to ourselves. We hold ourselves to much higher standards. And again, there are evolutionary and neurological reasons for that, which I won't go into here, obviously. But it's an interesting point that most people are more compassionate to other people. So let's consider, what is compassion? You might reflect on that yourself. Now, when you hear the word compassion, what comes to mind? When you see someone who is suffering or in pain or having some sort of difficulty, how do you feel physically? What sort of emotional quality might be around? And what sort of thoughts do you have? One really understandable response to seeing someone who's in pain or suffering is to want to turn away, to avoid the suffering, not in a bad way, not because we don't care, but because it might just feel too much. And sometimes, if we don't have the resources ourselves, that's actually the most skillful response in the short term. It may be, again, not to leave somebody hanging, but to not step in and try to make a response. But the other response is to turn towards the suffering, to turn towards the person and offer whatever support and assistance we can. And this, in this field, is what we call compassion. It's witnessing, being able to witness the pain of another and turn towards it. So bearing witness when we can, when we're able to do that, and doing what is within our ability at any given moment. So there's an emotional quality and an action quality to compassion. And when we relate to ourselves in this same manner, that's basically self-compassion. So this slide that's up at the moment is from an American researcher called Kristin Neff, who, if people are interested in looking at the science behind this, I just think they've broken it down really nicely. So they say the qualities of self-compassion include mindfulness that we've just been talking about. So mindfulness is about becoming aware, and it's the noticing part of compassion. So it includes mindfulness, a sense of kindness, being supportive and understanding rather than being critical. And the bit that really connects for me is it's remembering that at some level we're all in this together, regardless of our differences. We're all human beings. And there's that sense of common humanity that's in self-compassion that recognizes, you know what, if I'm suffering, the situation that I'm in, most people would suffer. So it stops us from feeling that sense of difference or disconnection from ourselves and others. So training our minds to be present helps us to see what's actually going on right here and now. And developing self-compassion helps us to turn towards ourselves in times of need with an open and warm quality. So why are these important? That's the wrong slide. Okay, we'll stay on this slide. Why are these important? So I'm going to ask you a question. Would you like to experience more focus, peace, and general life satisfaction? Less reactivity, pain, depression, anxiety, or stress? Maybe a higher sense of general well-being and a friendlier, more supportive relationship with yourself and others? So it's a pretty big question. I'm sure most of us would say, yes, I would like all of that, and it sounds too good to be true. But we now have over 2 decades of really robust research that has produced mountains and mountains of evidence that all of these are potential outcomes of a regular mindfulness and self-compassion practice. So research has been conducted in areas such as cancer, chronic pain, anxiety, arthritis, respiratory conditions, heart disease, diabetes, you name it, education, business, pretty much every area. It absolutely exploded about 2 decades ago. So using the latest in neuroimaging techniques, this research has provided hard evidence that the practices we're talking about can actually change the brain. So some of you are probably, like me, old enough to remember that they used to say that the brain actually stopped developing around your mid-20s, I think it was. But again, about 20, 25 years ago, this idea of neuroplasticity came in, where we started to realize that the brain actually keeps developing, and what we pay attention to develops pathways in the brain. So, it doesn't happen overnight, but these practices change the brain. And when we change our brain, our minds change with it. And when we change our minds, our brain changes with it. It's very exciting stuff. And when our minds change, so does our experience of ourselves, other people, the world, and our place in it. So there's really no question anymore that a mindful and self-compassionate practice has the potential to help. The challenge can be developing a regular practice and finding a way to integrate it into your lives. And it's particularly tricky if you're already in a really high stress situation. You know, bringing something new in when you've got a lot going on, health-wise or family-wise or whatever, it can be really tricky. So it doesn't have to be big, long sessions. The important part is that it's a regular practice. So it can be as short as just a few minutes. And you'll see that when in the series of videos. So this is where the videos come in. I'm just going to talk a little bit about that, and I'm conscious of the time. I'm trying not to talk too fast. When I get excited, I talk too fast, but I really want to give you a taste of the practice. So just talk a little bit about the series of the videos. So the series is best used in the order that we've presented it, because each session introduces a new set of skills and builds on the skills from the session before. So it's really good to do them in the order that we've presented them. And I also recommend practicing one session a day or one a week rather than going through the whole series in one day. But, you know, at the end of the day, these are there for your use, and you create the program that's best for you. So I've already highlighted that mindfulness practices are aimed at intentionally bringing the attention into the present moment rather than creating a state of relaxation. So relaxation is great, and you probably will experience it from the practices. It's a very common side effect, a good side effect, but it's not the main goal of mindfulness or self-compassion meditation and practices. And because of that, generally we practice in a seated position with arms and legs uncrossed, the spine straight but not rigid, and your body relaxed, supported by the chair and the ground. Once again, though, this is your practice, so if you want to or you need to lie down while you're doing the practices, feel free to do so. Just don't be surprised if you fall asleep. That's all. That's another side effect. And we usually have the eyes lowered or closed to minimize distractions and sort of turn the attention inwards, but again, trust your own wisdom. Also, in relation to the series of videos, I really do recommend practicing session 1, the grounding practice, which is the one we're going to do today, before any of the others, because it's a really important foundational practice. It's used at the beginning of all of the other practices, and it can be important in making them as safe and beneficial as possible. So I just want to talk a little bit about one of the other potential side effects of meditation. While there are so many benefits, and I've spoken a little bit about it, meditation can also bring, mindfulness or any sort of meditation can bring up really powerful emotions, particularly if you've experienced any significant trauma in your life that hasn't been worked through or integrated. Interestingly, mindfulness and compassionate practices are really useful in working with trauma, and I've used them in that relation in my own life. After a car accident that I had in my 20s that left me with some post-traumatic stress. But if you have had an experience like that, you may need to introduce them with the help of another person who's trained and skilled in that area rather than just diving in yourself. Having said that, again, the practices that we've developed in this series are very short, and they're worded in a very specific way to make them as safe and accessible for everybody. So in all of the practices, we've encouraged you to use your own wisdom and remember that you have choices. You can keep your eyes open, ground through the feet and the body, move your attention from internal to external, change your posture or even stand and move your body. And it's always an option to stop the practice and come back at another time if that feels like it's the right thing to do for you. So this is where that other slide came in. Some of you may be familiar with this already. Life is difficult for all us human beings at one time or another. We all get old, we all come across illness in some way or another. If we can change a situation or even influence it in some way, if we can't change it, then that's the wisest course of action. If we can't change it though, then finding a way to be with it, to allow it to be as it is while supporting ourselves with kindness and compassion, that is the wiser course of action. And that's what mindfulness and self-compassion allows us to be able to see the difference, to be able to take action when it's wise and it's available to us, to be able to sit with difficulty when that action isn't available to us. So once you've practiced with the videos a few times, what you will probably notice is that you can integrate the principles into your everyday life. So while the videos are what we call meditation, so they're a formal practice where we carve a bit of time out, none of them are over 10 minutes, we carve a bit of time out of our day to practice creating these states of mind, as much as we would if we were working with a muscle in the body. Once you've done them a few times though, you find that you can actually do them on the spot. So maybe when you're driving the car, in the supermarket, once we're allowed back in, and all those sort of things. So the main purpose of this series and of all the practices that we offer is to give you skills to take into the real world. Meditation, carving formal time out is really, can be really, really beneficial, but where they really come to life is when we're navigating the ups and downs of our everyday life. So it's my sincere wish that this series of practices are of benefit to you, those you love, people in your community, and maybe even the wider world. We're going to go into a short practice. So again, I don't know whether people are sitting or standing or lying down, but you can do this in any of those postures. If possible, find a seated position. So this is a grounding practice using the feet as what we call an anchor. So we're intentionally bringing the attention into the present moment by using an anchor, in this case, the felt sense of the feet on the floor. Because our minds are problem-solving and storytelling machines, by providing an anchor for the mind, we provide a resting space. When the mind is anchored, the central nervous system shifts from threat to soothe mode. And in this mind state, we think more clearly and can act more effectively. So finding a comfortable seated position with your arms and legs uncrossed, if possible, both feet flat on the floor. And if it's okay for you today, closing your eyes if that's comfortable, or just lowering your gaze. And check in with yourself, asking the question, where am I now? Where is my attention now? Is it here in this present moment? In the future, planning? The past, remembering? Or is it just caught up in some sort of dialogue, conversation? Just noticing where it is, and then starting to use your senses, all of your senses, to gather the attention into the present moment. Being aware of sounds around you, the temperature of the room, sensations of your clothes on the outside of your body, the points of contact between your body and the surface on which you're resting. the felt sense of your feet contacting the floor. Maybe even pushing your feet into the floor a little bit, just to really let the mind know that this is what we're doing. We're using the feet and the body as an anchor. Noticing where the mind is, being aware of the whole body. The points of contact between your body and the surface on which it's resting or seated, and knowing that you can trust that surface to support you. So maybe doing a scan and seeing if there's any particular tension anywhere, and seeing if you can just let that go a little bit. We're going to be here for about 5 minutes or so. So just arriving, being aware of what's happening around us, what's happening inside us. And then the second step of the practice is to gather the attention, sort of like bringing it from a floodlight or open attention down to a spotlight. And we're going to bring that attention down to the feet or to the hands, whichever feel best for you today, using the feet or the hands as the object of your attention. Aware of the heels, the soles of the feet, all of the toes, the tops of the feet. Notice also how they feel. Maybe they're hot or cold, achy or comfortable, tired or tense. Both feet or hands becoming the anchor or home base for your mind, for your attention when it wanders, which it will. It's what minds do. So when your mind wanders, caught by a sound or a thought, when you notice that, that's the point of true mindfulness. Noticing that you're no longer connected to the anchor of your attention, the feet or the hands. So when you notice that, as best you can, gently bring the attention back to your chosen anchor. So this is where the self-compassion comes in, the gentleness, the openness. So the quality of effort is kind of like a fly resting on your open palm. It's very light, it's very open. While you can, you're holding your attention on the felt sense of your feet in this light, open way. And whenever you notice your attention has wandered, you're gently and kindly, not with any aggression or judgment, bringing your attention back. Letting anything else, sounds, thoughts, feelings, drift to the edges of your awareness, or float in and out of awareness like clouds across the sky, while you gently, as best you can today, maintain the attention on the feet or the hands and return it when it wanders. And then the third step, as we move towards ending this practice, is to once again open up the attention to the full awareness, moving back from the spotlight to the floodlight, becoming aware once again of the whole body, the points of contact between your body and the surface, sensations on the inside and outside of the body, sounds around you, temperature of the room, letting your eyes float open if they're not already. And know that you can practice this as a longer or shorter version. So you can do this practice for 10 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever you want. You can do it for 3 seconds. It's just a practice of intentionally bringing your attention into the present moment. So that's the end of our practice today. Thank you for attending. As I said, I can't see anyone, so hoping someone's there. And I guess I'll hand it back over to Chanel now.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Tracy. That was, look, I was taking notes as you were talking, and I'm sure that what you had to say really resonated with people. And you know, talking about how we have that negative bias and our brain is wanting to go towards those negative thoughts, and trying to remember to have that kindness for ourselves. So I think now more than ever, with everything going on, it's very timely to check in with ourselves and consider, are we being kind to ourselves and having compassion for ourselves? So thank you so much. And yes, I'm sure everyone who's watching will hopefully is feeling very, very good now after that practice. So what we will do is we'll just invite people to share any questions that you might have, any thoughts around that practice, you know, any additional bits of feedback that you might have for Tracy, and we'll get started. I can see we have a couple of questions already. Also, one person has said, thank you very much, very calming and enlightening. So there you go, thank you, Tracy. One person has asked, how can mindfulness help me when I can't breathe? So you talked a bit at the beginning, Tracy, around designing the resources for people with respiratory conditions. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. I just read that question before, and thank you so much, whoever it is who put that in there, because it's one of the most critical questions. You know, and I guess there's 2 main responses that I would give to that, although I may change my mind and give more because I have a tendency to do that. What I would start with is, so one of the things that happens for us when we get short of breath or start to have difficulty with breathing is that it triggers that fight, flight and freeze response in the central nervous system. What that tends to do is, and this is a shorthand, it sends out all sorts of different chemicals, it shuts down some parts of the body and amps up other parts of the body. And one of the main things that it tends to do is create tension, particularly in the rib cage, around the shoulders. When you've got tension there, then it becomes even more difficult to breathe. The other thing that happens when you're in a fight, flight and freeze response is that you move towards a panic situation, and your breathing, even if you don't have a respiratory disorder problem, your breathing generally becomes much shallower, much quicker, your heart rate goes up, your blood pressure goes up, all of those sort of things. So now, obviously, when you're in the moment of extreme distress, it can be really hard to call on a strategy that you don't already have practiced. So that's why I really encourage people to practice this, so that you've actually got this, again, 2 things that happen. You've got the foundational, you've got the skill, the foundations of the practice are already in your brain, so you don't have to think so much to call on them. They've become an automatic response. That's number one. Number two is, what we know is that the more that we practice something, our base response to stress lowers. So we're less likely to get triggered. We have more range before we get triggered into a high stress or anxiety or panic response, which, you know, of course, if we can't breathe, of course, the body and mind is going to go into panic. So if you practice the mindfulness strategies, particularly the mindfulness strategies in this case, when you're not in a highly anxious state, it's going to lay down those practices so that if and when you go into an anxious state, and we all will at some point, you've got them on call and your body knows how to respond already. The other important point with that is, and this is why I don't use any breath-focused practices in this series. So when you go to a general meditation class, usually they will use the breath as a focus. We don't do that when we're working, if we've got respiratory problems, because it can trigger an anxiety response. So that's why we use the feet or the hands or a chair or a cold water, something that's a sensation, rather than using the breath. When I do refer to breathing in the series, I refer to the movement of the body, not breath itself. So I hope that answers the question. How do I use mindfulness when I can't breathe? Try to use it before you get to that point so that you've got it laid down as a skill. And please don't use breath focus. Use something else, feet, hands, something really tangible.
Thank you, Tracy. Thanks so much for providing those options and alternatives for people. It's I'm sure that was very helpful for the person that asked the question. We have got another couple of questions come through. Okay, so we do have someone who's asking, is it necessary to practice in silence? Wondering if you have any feedback or thoughts around that.
Well, my answer would be no. No. So this is moving kind of from mindfulness to meditation in a way. So meditation, in essence, meditation is about bringing the mind onto a particular focus. And there are literally thousands and thousands of different forms of meditation. Some use the breath as a focus, some use an image, a candle, some use guided visualizations or guided imagery. You're guided through a process, which is a little bit like what we're doing here, but we didn't use imagery. And others use sound, so all sorts of different sound. So it's really, it comes back to what your intention for your practice is, and also what works best for you, you know. So if my intention is to create a state of relaxation, it might be really nice to have some, you know, calming music or nature sounds in the background. If my intention is to do a more rigorous intellectual meditation, then I probably won't want the distraction of music or background. And that's when I'm going to do more silent meditation. Not on the topic here, but it's often what you might have heard of Vipassana or insight meditation. That's a silent meditation. But my answer to that really would be, it's what your intention is and what works for you, what you want to get out of your meditation and what helps you get there.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's really helpful for people to know that they can, as you say, work in with what their intention is and find out what works for them. So thank you. Look, we do have another question that's come in. Now this person has said thank you, and that they have always practiced with the focus on the breath. Is there any value in changing? They have said that they do not have any great problems with breathing except when exercising. Any thoughts or suggestions for that person?
Yes, and I've probably partly answered that already just in the discussion. Again, it depends on your particular situation, what your intention is. So there are many, many different breathing focused meditations and practices. I mean, you know, the difference between meditation and practice can be very subtle, but essentially a meditation, you're carving time out and deliberately focusing on the practice. Whereas just a day-to-day practice, you may do it while you're walking or exercising or riding a bike or something like that. And there are many, many different breath-focused ones where, you know, some you just follow the breath, it becomes the object of your attention. There's others where you change the timing of your breathing, you breathe fast or slow. So it really, it's a personal preference. I just find that generally speaking, if someone has respiratory difficulties, it's best not to focus on the breath. But that's a general statement. Some people find it helpful to focus on the breath. Usually, again, what I've found working in, so I worked in a pulmonary rehab program at a community health centre. So I was part of a multidisciplinary team. What we often found was if people worked with the mindfulness practices, particularly using the feet as an anchor and practicing being compassionate to themselves, that settled the nervous system down so that then they were actually able to work more on what they were doing with other members of the team. So they were able then to work more with the physiotherapist who did work on changing breath practices or brought exercise in. They were able to work with the occupational therapist more effectively because their central nervous system wasn't activated. They had a sense of being grounded, calmer. And when that happens, our thinking part of our brain is more on board rather than it being our fight, flight, and freeze going off. So, you know, if you find working with the breath helpful, that's great. My general experience is, as I've just explained, that I think for people with respiratory, if you can establish that grounding practice through the mindfulness, then you can sometimes move on to the other practices. I got a little carried away there, I hope. That was
great. Thank you, Tracy. And look, the other sort of questions that came through were more statements, really, just to say thank you to you. Someone has commented that only after those few minutes, you know, feeling really good, and we'll start to incorporate that daily. So thank you so much. Before we do, you know, say our farewells, I do want to just let people know more again about what's available for ongoing support. So in the chat box, you will hopefully see the link to the Mental Health Hub. Now, this is where you can access that suite of videos that Tracy talked about, including the grounding exercise. So those are available for you to incorporate into your day-to-day life, and you'll be able to also access the other information that we've covered around living well with the lung condition and looking after your well-being. I'd also like to thank our patient and carer representatives who graciously shared their lived experiences with us so that we could help produce this content. So thank you so much to them for being part of this journey with us and getting this hub established. You might see on the screen there as well, we have our contact information for our information and support centre. So if you are wanting to find out more information about our mental health resources, if you are interested in connecting with other people who are living with a lung condition or who are caring for a loved one with a lung condition, we do have programs available to connect you, to talk about what life is like for you and how you're coping, and encourage each other. We also have many different opportunities to share your story, to share your experiences. So if you are interested in joining our consumer representative team, and being involved with other patients and carers in doing that, please do reach out. You can call us on our free call 1-800 number, or send us an email, and we'll happily have a chat and provide you with more guidance. So look, thank you again, Tracy, for coming along. That was really fantastic. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much, and thank you for everyone who participated and the questions. They were great to flesh it out a little bit.
Thank you. Well, that's us for this webinar. So please take care of yourselves and each other, and please do connect in with us for more information and support.